Now we present to you America's quintessential iconoclastic anomaly. Wow. In talk radio, your host, Joe Cristiano.
Welcome, everyone, to Liberty Talk Radio, America's libertarian voice, broadcasting from our studio in Tulsa, Oklahoma, to around the world. I'm your host, Joe Cristiano, and this is your antidote to popular talk radio. Folks, it's time for us to take back control of our government now before this bureaucratic, oversized, and self-serving federal government starves us of our property, our freedom, our rights, and our liberty. But to do this, we must shed conventional thinking regarding our political structure. We need to be revolutionaries in thought, dissidents in action. Only after we recognize what our government is doing to our freedom and our Constitution will we start taking it back. And this program is just about that. Today, we are very fortunate to have a returning guest, no stranger to Liberty Talk Radio, Mr. Paul Jacobs, President of Citizens in Charge, a nonpartisan group working to protect and expand initiative rights. In addition to his many activities fostering individual liberty, Paul hosts Common Sense, an online and print opinion commentary, which reaches tens of thousands online readers and email subscribers, of which I am one. Okay? Paul, welcome to Liberty Talk Radio.
Joe, it's always great to be on. Thank you very much.
Well, Paul, I try to read every single one of your Common Senses. I don't get to all of them. I get to about 75% of them. I'm always, every time I read one, I said, how does he get all this information? I mean, you're so diversified in the subjects that you pick, and you relate them all to individual liberty. It is absolutely remarkable. Have you ever thought of taking all of your Common Sense commentaries, put them in a hardcover binder, and publishing it?
You know, we have talked about maybe doing a best of Common Sense and taking some of the more popular scripts. I also do a column every Sunday at townhall.com, and sometimes that's an expansion of my Common Sense. Sometimes it's brand new, but oftentimes if it is brand new, I'll then do a shorter Common Sense on it. But we've thought about taking some of those columns or taking Common Sense, some of the very short, 2-minute long, 250-word commentaries, and making a book out of it. If you go to the website, thisiscommonsense.com, I have a tremendous illustrator, Jim Gill, who does the artwork, and so it could be a fun book where, easy to read, something you pick up when you're flying somewhere, and you don't have to feel like you're going to miss a plot twist if you have to put it down.
Yeah, well, I find them not only interesting but educational, but even more so thought-provoking, and you pick on subjects that you typically don't see as a headline, but support so many of the activities or criticize so many activities that are going on today, and it helps you make sense of what is going on rather than just accepting what is being presented to you, especially from mainstream television. That really is our goal, to connect what's happening in the world today to the common sense things that we all understand in our lives. You can't eat the seed corn and still have it. You can't get ahead by taking money out of one pocket and putting it in the other. It's not right to steal stuff from people. Basic common sense, fundamental building blocks of any decent civilization. That's common sense. And I think when we look at the world today, and especially what's happening politically so often, and compare it to common sense, we see that it falls down on some very, very basic levels. And that, I think, is important to people. One of the things we try to do, too, is to find, you've got so much media out there, so much opinion available to people. How do we add value? And I think the way we add value is to grab stories all over the country, something that may be getting covered in Idaho or Connecticut, right, that the rest of the country isn't following, that connects in a way to what we're all going through. We love to highlight activists out there doing stuff because, everything's impossible until somebody does it. Right.
And so we like to bring stories about people who are making it happen. And
And we don't fool around. It's not always everything's wonderful. If you just try hard, the world is your oyster. And sometimes I forget to turn off my phone. But anyway, that's, we like to bring the stories about people who are making a difference in their community. We do sometimes, oftentimes, talk about what's happening nationally, but usually with a different angle that folks maybe haven't thought about, or just a way to kind of say, okay, with all the hubbaloo about this particular thing, what is the essence of it? And does it make any common sense that our government's involved in thus and so? And really from foreign policy, where we're involved in wars that I keep pointing out, nobody seems to have even a plan to get us out, to bring the boys and girls home, to finish the job. And so, of course, when those adventures are not successful, well, if you've never had a plan to succeed, why would you expect that you're going to succeed? To things like eminent domain, which, eminent domain's one where, we've got governments, local governments taking people's stuff, and it's so easy to demonize Washington. And frankly, as you and I know, they deserve it. But we have problems right locally in city after city after city. Eminent domain, the Supreme Court years ago said cities could basically steal property from one person, give it to another if they thought it was going to advance economic growth, meaning right. If this new person who gets your business land or your home or whatever to build something new they want to build can provide more tax dollars, you're out. And, money talks and what walks. So that's the opinion our leaders, not just in Washington, not just the evil people of the blue team or the red team, but in community after community, decent people generally, not axe murderers, are getting government and then think it's okay to take from one person their property and give it to someone else so that the city can have more tax dollars. That is so un-American, I don't know what to say about it. And things like civil asset forfeiture, which we understand as the policeman, taking stuff that he shouldn't take, not charging anyone with a crime. It corrupts our police forces. But we see it more and more at the federal level, too, where the IRS comes in. Or the DEA has been found that a vast majority of their takings, they don't really suspect that the person they're stealing from, without charging any crime against, is someone who's involved in the drug trade. And they find with the IRS that the vast majority of people that they're grabbing their bank account with $50,000 or $100,000 and saying that they're doing it because they're structuring their deposits into the bank. If you have a little cart in New York City or Washington, D.C. or any major city selling tacos or soup or whatever, if you make $6,000 or $8,000 or $9,000 every day or every couple of days and you take that to the bank, the IRS may come and grab your money. And they're not grabbing it. The recent study that came out, this is maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, that it was a Inspector General's look at what's happening. And the Inspector General said that the majority of cases, there is no real suspicion that these people did anything illegal. Right. And yet they're having their money stolen by a federal agency. And of course, I look at it and I say, if we think we're ever going to stop the IRS from robbing us, if we can't stop the local cop from robbing us, and of course, and I'm not suggesting that people who work for the IRS want to rob anyone, or that the local cop is a dirty cop who wants to steal from people, but we have created a governmental system in which they are incentivized to do so.
Right.
And of course, as anybody who's ever been involved in business and you put a bonus on a certain job, all of a sudden you got a bunch of applicants. Whatever we subsidize, we get more of. Whatever we punish, we get less of. And so the incentives are everything. And our incentives in so many different ways at every level of government are pointed in the wrong direction. Hence, we're going in the wrong direction.
Yeah. Now, I guess the solution to this is we all become cronies. right? I mean, really, one senator would not do it to another senator if they're in the same ballpark, all with the same objectives, right? They're crony. That's what crony capitalism is. It's a club, of which there are people who belong and people who don't belong. I don't belong. Maybe I should belong, and I would be exempt from all this.
Well, the truth is, if you're a businessman in America, and there was just a recent study that came out and showed this, that investments in lobbying the government for special favors pays off.
Right.
It's a good investment. The return on that investment is high. So if you don't have any scruples, if you don't think it's wrong for you to get a special sweetheart deal from some guy who's in public office because you wrote him a few checks for, it's one reason I think they like some of these donors like campaign contribution limits. Okay, I can max out to you for a couple thousand, and then I'm going to get benefits that are worth millions.
Right.
Years ago, and this was literally probably 25, 30 years ago, and as someone who's 21, I don't know how I could have been alive back then, but literally many years ago, someone did an analysis of Archer Daniels Midland, and they spent $100 million on lobbying, but they received over $1 billion in benefits. So, you tell me that's a tenfold return on investment. And so these folks who are putting money in like that, the crony capitalism works for the crony, and it works for the politician. It isn't capitalism, though. It isn't a free market, and it doesn't work for the average person. You look at Solyndra, which was one of the big, clean energy things that we were going to fund, and the politicians now, they're always talking about investments. Investing is something you do with your money. When you're stealing money from people and giving it to someone else, that's not an investment. That is called it's redistribution, but it's cronyism. And the more we have that sort of system, the more we're not going to be productive. When you think of the most success, well think about you still to this day will hear people talk about, well, under the Clinton administration, Clinton balanced the budget. Or if they're Republicans, they might say, well, Newt Gingrich forced Clinton to, the Congress under Republicans forced a balanced budget, and they didn't go into deficit. Well, the reality, of course, is that that's not quite accurate.
Right.
Without the Social Security money coming in that, of course, was supposed to go in Al Gore's lockbox, there was no balanced budget. So basically, they were taking money people were putting into Social Security that's going to have to be paid back, and counting that as somehow regular tax revenue that doesn't matter what you do with it. So, if you ignore all your liabilities, it's amazing how much better your balance sheet looks.
Yeah.
But there was a tremendous closing of that deficit, and it was due to economic growth. And there was, there's always been this polling, who deserves more credit for the economy, the president or the Congress? Well, in reality, neither of those two entities does anything much to promote economic growth except to get their heinies out of the way and let people produce. So, if you think about that, neither one of them deserves the credit. And I know Scott Rasmussen, who used to be with a polling firm. He started Rasmussen Reports, and Rasmussen's still a polling firm. He's not associated with it anymore, but they did polling that asked who's more responsible for the economic situation, and they'd ask whether it was the president, the Congress, or American business. And of course, overwhelmingly, people would say American business. And so it's interesting. For so many years, you had this polling that's asking either or, and neither is the answer. So it's, again, it reinforces this idea. I just was home having lunch and saw some commercial. Virginia has an election this year, so we get to have commercials even in the off year. But somebody's running for governor to increase wages. Now, it seems to me that if you wanted to increase wages, you would start a business and pay people higher wages. You'd do something that was productive. Running for public office, to be in the government, to raise people's wages, the only way you can do that is by fiat. Just demand that they all raise them. And again, that's the sort of forced economy that is just a huge problem, and it's a problem all over the world. It's the sort of thing that's why the Soviet Union was not so successful, is because they had a command economy where some bureaucrat said, we're going to do this or we're going to do that, and maybe some politician overrode it. But it wasn't coming from thousands of individual decisions to purchase a product or not purchase a product, to produce a product or not produce a product. And our system has been shown again and again to be the most successful, especially against a command economy like that. And yet we have people who continually seem to want to lurch over to the command economy that has not worked anywhere.
Isn't Puerto Rico a perfect example where Puerto Rico was not a rich country, but at least was relatively stable until the United States forced Puerto Rico to abide by the same rules as the states. And of course, Puerto Rico is not part of the United States. I guess it's a protectorate or something, or a territory, yeah. Yes, and which I don't understand, but they impose things like the minimum wage and other laws that were part of the United States, but didn't fit Puerto Rico, and now Puerto Rico is in bankruptcy, in turmoil. Unemployment is astronomical. People are literally starving in Puerto Rico, and their debt keeps on rising exponentially. I mean, why doesn't somebody stand back and say, hey, we did a bad thing. We should let them run Puerto Rico the way they right. feel they know how to run Puerto Rico, not dictate to them, our state or federal laws imposed upon them, which totally disintegrates everything that they're trying to achieve.
Yes, and that's just basic freedom. In the same way that, look, as a kid, your parents are going to tell you what to do, and you might get some money. Oh, you better put some of that in savings when you're 7. Right. And the truth is, some of us, when we're 7, we bristle just a little bit about being told what we have to do by our parents. But my goodness, to think about nations, to think about adult people who are being dictated to about what to do with their money, or anything. You can have this. It's not all about government. It's not just that, geez, we've got some big bugaboo about government. If any other aspect of society were run in the same way, it'd be a problem. And I was thinking of medicine and healthcare. And of course, the biggest problem in healthcare is that the government's gotten involved and created all kinds of disincentives and screwy disconnects between the doctor and the patient. But I have seen changes in what's good for you or not good for you. We've all seen them over the years. It used to be that margarine, not butter. And then over time, people thought, oh, no, butter's actually better for you. Used to be that don't eat fat because it'll make you fat. And so everybody, all the cereals or other products that had a ton of sugar, processed sugar in them, said no fat. And people bought them, and people got awfully fat, because if you eat a bunch of sugar that more than you need, it turns to fat. Yeah. And of course, you need a certain amount of fat. Anyway, it's true with milk. Now they're moving back to saying maybe whole milk is actually better for you than skim milk. They don't know. Even the experts in different areas, and I'm not saying throw out all scientific knowledge. Nobody knows. You can't ever believe anybody. Just go by just shoot from the hip. But we all need to use our own judgment and a little bit of common sense, and realize it's like with raw milk is illegal in a bunch of states. And the reason it's illegal is because, well, if it were bad, some people could get sick, so on and so on and so on. If people want to use raw milk, if it were really so dangerous, we wouldn't be alive for centuries. That's the only thing we had. We lived. And so it's just, common sense like that, where They want to dictate what we do, what we eat, whether we buy a big Coca-Cola in New York City or can only buy a small one. All these things are paternalistic, maternalistic. They're those in power dictating to the rest of us how we should live our lives. And then we see the cross current is what I would see it as, because there's a kind of a totalitarian sense of all that we make the decisions, and anything that could hurt anybody at any point, we have to have some national board that would tell us what to do and tell everybody in the country what to do. But then we also see that same system, which seems to be misguided but maybe nice, cares about us, doesn't want us to be too fat or too skinny or have any problem ever, also is a system that diverts large resources into investments. And people go to Congress who are not wealthy, and 20 years later they're in Congress and they're very wealthy. Congress is the best stock picking group in the United States of America. People who are tight with congressmen find themselves making great financial deals. The folks who did Solyndra, that company went bust, and the taxpayers were out $500 million. But the folks who were running that got paid pretty nicely, at least for a few years when it was still running. Right. So again, crony capitalism works for the cronies, and in a sense, totalitarianism works for the totalitarians. It's the same concept, though. It's a complete negation of freedom and allowing individuals to make choices. And for those of us who are libertarians, the challenge is always, if you let people make choices, someone's going to make the wrong choice. And that's true. We just have a much better society when people are allowed to make a mistake, as long as they own it. But if we have a society that lets people make mistakes, we usually then have some politician or bureaucrat who says, "Oh, no, we have to protect the person from suffering any of the ill consequences of that mistake." And I look at this, the 2008 debacle and TARP, and where the government comes in and bails out the banks and bails out AIG and so on and so on. And so many people, well, if they didn't do that, it would be disastrous. It would have hurt so many people. But by doing that, we created a moral hazard where in effect, we have now told big operations, you're too big to fail. Why not? Why not play fast and loose? Because if you run into trouble, the taxpayer is going to come in and bail you out. And I think we've told a lot of people the same thing. Nobody would want to say to a woman who maybe has 3 or 4 children that you shouldn't have more children because we don't want to pay the welfare for it. But the reality is nothing against children. It's someone's got to take responsibility. When they talked about welfare reform many years ago, a lot of the pro-life people were opposed to the reform. I say a lot, I don't know what the percentage was, but there were some people. And they were opposed to it because they feared that it would cause women to abort their babies instead of keep them if there wasn't a financial incentive for them keeping them. And I understand. I'm pro-life. I hate the idea of abortion, but it strikes me as we live in fear. We're constantly being, our emotions and our money and our politics is being kidnapped, and it's extortion kind of. If we don't do this disaster will happen. It's like immigration. Well, we can't let immigrants in because they'll eat up too many resources. We can't afford to pay for them. Well, why do we have all these resources hanging out there that anybody can grab? I'd rather have the immigrants come in and take what jobs they can get and let more people enjoy freedom and a great economy. And if it means that we don't have a welfare state, I mean, when you think about it, if someone who's traveled halfway across the world is not someone you want to have to shell out money to help out, then why are we shelling out money to help the people who've been here for 6 generations and won't go out and get a job?
Right. Yeah. Well, you know, what's interesting is that, you know, there are people around the world that would come to the United States and work for anything, absolutely anything, and work day and night just to learn, to get a job, to earn some money. They will live in the street if they have to. They will do anything and everything. And what people fail to realize with immigration is that people say, well, they come here and they take. I said, oh, no, well, you know, if they come here, they become consumers also, so they must give. So the more people you have coming in, the more exchanges you have. And the higher the exchange rate, the more robust your economy becomes. I mean, you know, Paul, I have never been so concerned about our country, more so than in the past few months. It seems that everything that we do, we're doing incorrectly. We are doing it in a non-libertarian, non-freedom, crony, you know, capitalism process, and at the same time, we are restricting freedom, and we are doing the exact opposite what we said we were going to do. We elected Trump to be president. And if you read what he has said prior to being president about not being involved in foreign conflicts, not being in Syria, not being in Afghanistan, and now all of a sudden he's piling in the money. No, he gave Saudi Arabia, what, but $65 or $56 billion worth of aid to a country, the most repressive regime in the world, probably, maybe second to Kim Jong-un, you know, and we applaud him, and that's all crony capitalism. All that money is being circulated amongst just a few companies with a handful of individuals at the expense of the American citizen, the American consumer, the American taxpayer. And I don't see this working out. I just don't see any way any of this is going to work out. It has got to end ugly, so that Mother Nature eventually says, okay, we're going to fix this, but it's going to hurt, and we're going to bring everything back to its least common denominator and build it back up again, and let this be a lesson to you. Don't do this again. And I'm making it very simplistic, but I feel that's what's going to happen. I don't feel very good about the direction of our country. And it seems like the more we say we're going to free up the marketplace, the more we're going to allow freedom to reign, the more rules and regulations we write about those comments that we made, and making it more restrictive. And it seems that I have some millionaires and even billionaires on this program, and what's very interesting is most of them don't even live in the United States anymore. They're not that stupid. I mean, they're out. They're in Argentina. They're in Singapore. They're in Hong Kong. I mean, any place but the United States. But they have interest in the United States, but they also have interests around the world. And the United States is not their favorite place anymore. And what's your feeling? Am I just a doomsdayer, or am I just doom and gloom, or I guess I'm becoming clinically depressed. But I just wanted your feedback on that.
Well, you know, it's funny because I have kind of the same, you know, self-analysis. Is it just that I'm getting older and I'm you know, more dour about the future and so on? But I think this last election, I have kind of said through every election for president, this is the worst choice ever. And then they just keep having a worse choice and a worse choice.
Yeah.
And I think this last choice, though, I don't think I even get much argument from anybody. You know, people keep saying, I can't believe this country elected Donald Trump. And I keep saying, you realize he was running against Hillary Clinton.
That's right.
And of course, you know, we heard a lot about elections are fixed. But the election was fixed, and it was fixed in this way. It was fixed in the way that, no alternative was allowed to be in that debate. And as you're probably aware,
Right.
after the election, the FEC admitted in federal court that it should not have allowed the Presidential Commission to function as a true charity because it was a partisan organization. And it was a partisan organization because it blocked everybody except for the two major parties, it was formed by the head of the Republican Party and the head of the Democratic Party. Its goal was always the same: to protect the two major parties as a cartel, as a duopoly, and to block access to anybody else. Now, in most of the elections in my lifetime, I don't think if the Libertarian or the Green Party candidate or an independent was in the debate, it would have made all that difference. Now, 1992, when Ross Perot was in the debate and seemed to show that he was a little different than these guys, I remember distinctly him saying, "You're right, I don't have that much experience in running up," I think he said, a $3 or $4 trillion debt. Of course, it's 19 trillion now. But he got 19% of the vote. And I think this time there is a good chance that it would have just so split up things that it may have gone to the House of Representatives, which, you kind of hate to see that. But the truth is we would have gotten a better president probably,
right,
than either Hillary or Donald Trump. I realize that's a pretty doggone low bar.
Yeah.
But when you think about how the world is progressing overall, I can't think of Don Boudreaux at George Mason and with Mercatus Center came out recently and pointed out that if you could choose to be yourself or John D. Rockefeller in 1916 and be the richest, a billionaire at a time when nobody was a billionaire except for him, which would you choose? And pointed out how much better life is for someone who's below the median income, who's certainly working class at best, kind of has a better life, has more stuff and more freedom and more fun. Because remember, the founders were smart enough to put in Pursuit of Happiness. Mm-hmm. It's not all about stuff. And it's a better life to be poor today in America than it is to be the richest man in the world 100 years ago.
Right. Yeah.
Now that's tremendous growth, tremendous progress. Our phones are crazy, good and bad, and they drive us crazy, but we can do things on our phone that you would have needed a room of computers 30, 40 years ago to do. And so it's a beautiful thing that's happening. And you see, I think in the gay marriage, and there's still lots of people who are diametrically opposed to gay marriage, but it's something as libertarians that, I hear about how, well, it took Hillary Clinton a little bit of time. I was talking to someone the other day, she was awfully late to that issue. And they said, yeah, but I mean, she came over. I said, well, when I say she was late to the issue, I mean about 30 years late.
Yeah.
Because libertarians in the 70s were talking about full equal rights for gays. And it's the kind of thing where you see that progress, you see the progress in attitudes. And it doesn't mean every attitude is progressed. I mean, we 2 steps forward, 1 step back sometimes. But then you look at politics, and you look at governments, and you look at the world, and the United States is at war all over the place. We have a war on terror that is designed never to end. Now, we've had a lot of people, and not just modern people, and not anti-American people, but people like Edmund Burke and others who've said, war is the health of the state.
That's right.
And that it's just dangerous to be at war all the time. Our founding fathers would be are. I mean, they're spinning even faster than they were spinning before. And we can't be at war and have this national security state where the government spies on everybody. We can't do this for decades and decades and decades and expect to have a free country. We've already lost enormous amounts of freedom. And when the government spies on everything you do, is that a totalitarian society or is that a free society? Mm-hmm. And I don't think anyone's ever pretended it's a free society. Well, we now live in a country in which they spy on everything we do.
Right.
We just, the FISA court just came out and slapped Obama administration around for abusing. Not just that they did things to spy on people and grab their records that they weren't supposed to, but that they did it again and again and again and again. And that even the couple of steps that they thought they might have been able to justify legally, they took many more in addition to that. And they did it all the time. So, I don't expect that that's going to change unless the American people kind of step up and demand something different. And when you look at our election process, there's, how do we do it? If it's Hillary versus Trump for every office for the rest of time, how would you pick in that election to free your society, to change things, to improve things? I don't, how would you do that? And so we need a better process, and it's why people like me have for years been pointing people toward the initiative process. Now, I know, about 60% of the cities and towns in the country have it. About 40% of the states, 45% of the states have initiative and referendum at the statewide level. We've got nothing at the federal level. But I'm convinced we're going to have to be able to do most of it ourselves. We have a process, and as you may know, Joe, I work with Fair Vote that deals with voting processes and proportional representation, which I think would be a better way to pick a legislature. And it could be done more in an American way than a European way. There are slight changes that I think would make it better and would fit better with our system. But all of these things we want to do, all the reforms, they're out there. We've got 300 million bright, shiny people who are running around thinking of new things. So we can make all the reforms, except we don't have a functioning political system. Right. And so we don't make the economic reforms because, of course, that's where there's big money saying, don't you dare do anything different. They start to touch the election code. There's a lot of money demanding different things. And most of us who are not millionaires or billionaires, we don't have any money to put up to say, hey, make my taxes, $52 less. So we have a huge problem. We have a bunch of huge problems, but the number one problem is politically getting at them. Somehow controlling our government so that we don't run off the rails and we have a equal shot. And I look at things like licensing laws. Just a few weeks ago, I did a commentary about Idaho, where the governor has claimed to be a big free market guy, and he supports freedom and enterprise, and he was in Congress and gave speeches and comes back and he's governor. And they pass a reform to make it easier to be a cosmetologist, to fix people's hair, and I guess nails and other things. But oftentimes, you're talking about things like cornrowing hair, which all over the country, and it's something that happens all over now, but it started in the African American community, and that's still where most of the customers and practitioners are. And these women who knew how to do it, being told that they have to go through 2,000 hours of barber school,
right? Barber
schools that don't know how to do it. They have to go take courses in something they're not interested in order to get a license to do what they know how to do better than anybody else. And the big horror story, if they do it wrong, is a bad haircut. So it's like that's totally insane. And so you see everything from fighting no-win wars, and I always say in Afghanistan, in Iraq, how many years before we can leave because they're wonderful free societies? 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, a century, 2 centuries? But everything from that to this little policy at the state or local level that is blocking people, and overwhelmingly poorer people, minorities, in other words, all the disadvantaged that we need some government program to help, just get out of their way. Get out of their way, for heaven's sakes. So it's from the tiniest policy at the local level blocking any sort of free movement and free markets, to at the national level fighting, policing the world. Now every weapon system has some sort of base, of operations in almost every congressional district in America. And so we're stuck. And it seems to me that the only way to get unstuck is politically we have to find a ways to act on our own. And that's why at the local level, I mean, I'd like to find ways to do more, but doing things that open up the process from criminal justice stuff like ending civil asset forfeiture.
Right.
You don't save the whole world if you end civil asset forfeiture in one city or one state, but you create a situation in which now their police are less likely to corrupt. I mean, it's like anything else. It has snowball effects, and I think that people who are serious, if what you want to do is talk politics 5 minutes or 20 minutes a week or hours, but you never want to do anything, you're not going to be part of the solution. I hate to tell you that.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of people like that. Maybe you can write us a check. But if you're serious about changing America and saving things for your children and your grandchildren, and as we get older in life, we start to think about those things, because that's what we're really leaving behind. Right. I used to give a talk, and I can remember when I was a pretty young guy, and someone came by. I wasn't married. I was like 21. Somebody came by our workplace and was trying to sell me insurance. And I said, well, who would be the benefit? Who would be the beneficiary if I died? Well, you could name your parents. And I thought, no, money comes from them to me. It's not going the other way. And so, I had no interest in it. Of course, once I got married and had kids, I saw the reason for insurance, and I have insurance. But when I think about it, it's not, my fear is not that I die and my kids are somehow destitute on the street. They've got relatives who love them. They have a mom who's smarter than their dad. They've got all kinds of ways to make it on their own. And they're pretty much, got one still at home who's 17 going on 35, but they're pretty much, adult kids. And that's not what I worry about. I do worry about whether they will have the sort of society to live in, to raise kids in, to be free in, to feel secure in, that I have had. And I think that's something. So when it comes to insurance, I think people, nobody can force you to get out there on the streets and collect signatures and put issues on the ballot or whatever you think might help. But if you don't do it, you're not gonna have the same sort of society. And so investing your time and your effort and your money into what I would call political insurance is the best way to leave your kids a better world. And that's what I'm afraid they're not going to have.
Most people I know are still embedded in this political paradigm where they say, oh, I'm a Republican because, and they give you this reason, but it has no semblance to whatsoever with reality. Or they say, I'm a Democrat because, and it has no semblance to reality. And it seems that they've just been brainwashed and they just repeat the same thing over and over again, but they don't want to think past that initial step, that front. They don't want to go behind the curtain. And when you get behind the curtain, most people get very frustrated or angry or argumentative, and they resist wanting to understand why you're saying what you're saying. And that's the difficulty I have, and that's why I stay away from politics, because it becomes an emotional issue and no one wants to talk fact. And as long as we stay in this, well, I'm not like one of those Democrats or I'm not like one of those Republicans, once we stay in that mindset, nothing changes. And it seems like the only thing that's going to make this change, and this is going to sound wacko, is that if we encounter a financial crisis that is so huge, so burdensome on the American economy, that it proves beyond a shadow of a doubt, even to the diehard believers of each party, that our system, the way it is now, is corrupt and wrong, and we have to return to the Constitution. But I think it's going to take an incredible amount of pain and suffering before people actually realize that, because they're not going to buy what you're saying. They're not going to buy what I'm saying. That I'm saying is because they're either a Republican or they're a Democrat. And they still believe. I have friends that still will answer everything, but don't worry, Trump will make America great again. And it just floors me how they can say that and be a functioning person at the same time.
Yeah, I had a good friend. I think I told the story on your air. I had a friend who was a big Obama supporter, and I asked him what he was going to be doing after Obama first won in 2008. And he said, I'm pretty much out of politics. Obama won, problem solved. And I just, and of course, I was no fan of Obama. I'm not any fan of Donald Trump either. But to think that you're going to elect somebody who's going to do everything perfect, and that they're not going to have any resistance from people who disagree. But I think that's just silly. But I think you hit on something in terms of we do have we're in this weird situation where no matter how bad the Republican is, the Republican activists can say, well, at least they're not the evil Democrat. I mean, how many people voted for Donald Trump because, my goodness, we had anybody but Hillary Clinton.
Right.
And how many people voted for Hillary who said, I don't even like Hillary, but I have to vote for her to stop him. And I think reforms to the election process and to the party, the two major parties have become embedded in the government and in law. And that's not how the framers wanted things. In fact, they specifically spoke out about factions and the dangers of factions. And by factions, they meant political parties. And so, we need change there. I think it's easy for most folks. And for the most part, I think, you can't get too upset about what one person does that you think, gee, that's not going to help. You just got to move on. But there are going to be a lot of people, especially with social media encourages it. Our television programs, what my wife likes to call my arguing shows. You got the left-wing bias, you go to Fox and you get the right-wing bias. And what I find most disturbing about those shows is not the bias, but the unwillingness to confront the other side's real argument.
Right.
They constantly build up straw men. They constantly take one comment completely out of context to demonize the other side.
Right.
And of course, if the other side is demons, then your side, even if they're flawed human beings, at least they're not demons. They're not devils.
Right.
And so that's so much of politics is that way. But I am convinced that if people have an opportunity to break out of that, they will. And one place, and it just happens a little bit at a time, and I think the more strategic that we can be as political leaders, and I don't say that as the leader of some country, if you're active in your community and you talk to a bunch of people about how, who should be elected and what on the ballot ought to be voted for, and you've been involved petitioning for an initiative or what have you, you're a political leader. And I think it's really important that people realize that. They're not just Joe Schmo. That's how change happens. And I'm convinced none of the changes we need will happen because we elected the right people to public office.
Right. Yeah.
If we elect the right people and create the ground, the environment, then that will be very helpful. But we've got to create the environment. I look at Republicans overcoming the Democrats in 1994. It would have never happened had we in the term limits movement not put initiatives all over the place on the ballot at the state level and local level, in New York City, in Wyoming, in Idaho, in San Francisco. All those places voted overwhelmingly for it. It was an issue that allowed people, and we still haven't gotten it at the congressional level, so it's not as if it ushered in success. We had success a lot of places and have term limits a lot of places, but it allowed people from all different political parties and persuasions to get involved and work together. And then they're talking to each other. And I'm convinced if you got the average liberal from wherever and the average conservative from wherever, and maybe sprinkled it in with a few others, they could figure out not all solutions to every problem. Let's face it, there's no nirvana that we're reaching for, but just some sensible things moving forward. The other thing that if you got regular people together to talk about this, people who believe something but respected someone on the other side who believed the opposite might step back and say, you know what, I really think we ought to have, let's say, prayer in school. But I realize my friend Bill has a different religion, and he might not feel comfortable there. Or I wrote a couple things a couple of years ago to no success whatsoever on abortion. Just trying to get people who believed that abortion was fine or, should be totally legal to realize that other people had a very, very devout belief that it was murder. And that even if you don't agree with that belief at all, just to try to create a society in which there was more peace and brotherhood and friendliness, and people didn't feel like they were being forced to do all kinds of things that bothered their conscience, that you ought to at least say, look, there's no government money going to it. And that fight continues. And that fight does not spring up, for the most part, from the public. The fight over abortion that continues on every little nook and cranny of that issue are wedges that politicians and political consultants devise because they want to fight about that. Because if we're fighting over that emotional issue, you might forget about the fact that you're getting ripped off all the time.
Yeah.
So but I do think that I worry if there's a terrible economic breakdown. Well, we could blame the crony government economy that we have, except probably half the people are going to say, capitalism didn't work. The free market, as if this is a free market.
Right, free market,
it's just laughable.
Yeah.
But that's and there are people who are communists who will argue, hey, the Soviet Union wasn't really communist. It was, and you and I would have a lot of problems with their argument. But I don't think this is the free market. And so we would have all kinds of disagreements about who was really to blame. And the worst thing in a crisis, there's the tendency for people to follow the guy who seems the toughest,
right,
and who's going to scream the loudest. And so that's why I think it's so critical. We've had some tough times, and we realize, we realize this downturn, depression, recession, whatever you want to call it, 2008. We've been pumping money since then, and it's not as if we're really out of that.
Oh, no.
It could come back. The housing bubble that burst, well, it's been blown up again, and it could burst again. And so we're not out of the woods on any of that. But now is a great time to do things that will change the dynamic, so that, it's not just that you change the law and help people. That's the most important thing. But it's also got a huge educational value. For instance, two issues I mentioned earlier, eminent domain and civil asset forfeiture, are both issues that so often we think about, the bad politicians in Washington. And you're right, they are. But we don't think about them at home. We don't think about them in Tulsa, Oklahoma, or in Little Rock, Arkansas, or in Woodbridge, Virginia. And they are, and of course, it isn't that they're bad people. Our problem isn't electing, axe murderers to office. We do that every once in a while, but that gets sorted out a little easier. It's electing people who then use the system to their advantage instead of creating a better system. So I just think that if we look at some of these issues, it will help educate people to the fact that if they're not paying attention, their own governments, their friends in government, will become tyrants.
Yeah.
And the truth is, if they were in government and didn't mind the P's and Q's about what's the Constitution, what's this all about, what is the bigger picture. The bigger picture is we're trying to give everyone the freedom to find their own happiness in this world. The moment we start to think that we are the solution because, well, I was elected and I have a vision, and we start forcing people to live how we want to live, it's no good. And that, I think, people miss that a lot of times. We so often talk about, well, if the government passes this law, all the poor people will no longer be poor. And nobody's figured out how to pass laws like that.
Yeah. Well, it all comes back to reducing the restrictions on people and for people to live their own lives, because we can go back historically and learn that when Social Security was enacted, that was a start of the breakup of the American family, because grandma and granddad, they had their Social Security and they moved to Florida and they were away from their family. And when you were almost vilified if you were a housewife and stayed home with your kids, that was a horrible thing to do. You had to go out and get a job as long as you had to, because the cost of living was going up faster than your income. And then you gave your kids to a nursing home, or a nursing home, a child care center, and one's worse than the other, as I know, because my daughter-in-law is involved in it in that arena, and although she was the supervisor of the people who inspected all of the these places where kids were pushed to go, where their mothers went out to work. She put her daughter, my granddaughter, in what she thought was the best place. They eventually closed that place down. I mean, we seem to have broken up the family, and that core family belief, and that interchange of responsibility, and the need to take care of the elderly, because the elderly was the ones that brought us to where we are today. The respect for the people who've lived a long life. They have some wisdom and knowledge and skills that they can pass on. That's all gone. And I just think that the very fabric of America has been ripped, shredded, and just discarded. And now we just have a whole bunch of people just working, buying as much as you can, staying in as debt as you can, and trying to beat the system somehow, which you're not doing, and it's all going to work out well. I am, unfortunately, incredibly pessimistic at this point. I don't think there's a turning back point. I think everything you said was correct. I agree. And I think that's all because we're not correcting the situation we have at hand. We are going to face the consequences, which I have no idea what that is. If I knew, of course, I'd make trillions of dollars, because I'd be the only person in the world who did. But it's not going to be pretty, and it's going to make us reevaluate, what America truly stands for. And we're going to make one decision or the other. Either we're going to become a totalitarian state, or we're going to revert back to the precepts of the Constitution and become a free society and throw all these bums in the river who are running our country.
Well, I'll tell you, if it comes from the public, I have a lot more confidence that it would be the latter. If it comes from a crisis and then political leadership deciding we need to go this direction, I'm just absolutely terrified about where that would go. And I think you're very right about the family being at the center of this. And I know in the late 60s, I was born in 1960, so I was a little bitty kid. But in the late 60s, the 70s, as I came of age, you'd hear people talk about the destruction of the family and so on. And there's Patrick Moynihan pointing out that in 1965, when the Civil Rights Act was passed, that you had basically 25% of African American families who were having, or not families, you're having 25% of African Americans were born to single mothers. And now that is close to 75%. And And you can look at it and go, well, boy, that's terrible for the African American community. Well, of course, it's terrible for the whole country.
Right.
But it's not limited. We have this tendency to think that somehow if it's bad for them, well, somehow we're not involved. Among whites, and of course all these designations of white and African American, as we love each other and have more kids and stuff, it all becomes almost completely ridiculous.
Right.
I mean, our first black president was half white.
Yeah.
So and most people in this world are not all one or the other. And
right.
Anyway, but having said all that, among whites, it is a 5-fold increase. Now, it's still below, I believe it's just below 30%, but it has grown 5-fold instead of 3-fold.
Right.
And so this is not just an African American problem. This is an everybody problem, although it's probably less of a problem among Asian families.
That's correct, because they still have that context of the family.
Because they have that now, and maybe it has absolutely no connection. Maybe there's not even a scintilla of connection between these two things. But when we have affirmative action that says we need to have a certain number of minorities go here and you can't be overrepresented, who always gets hurt in college admissions? It's Asians more than whites, because they're doing they have the most top students.
Right.
Now, I don't for a second think that's because Asians are just born with better brains that the little synapses in the noggin go much faster than anybody else. I don't think they're naturally better than whites or blacks or Hispanics, but they're doing better. And so I really do think there is a huge connection between families being intact, believing in the family, and taking self or family responsibility. I know at different times in my life, I have 5 brothers and sisters. There have been different times where I didn't pick up the phone and say, hey, could you help me out? They saw I needed something, and they helped me out. Yeah. And I did the same thing. And as a parent, and this, there's nothing you like more than seeing your kids with good relationships with each other.
Right.
I always tell my kids, be nice. You never know when somebody might be able to help you.
Yeah.
And that's the glue that keeps society together. Families are the unit, the basic unit that I think keeps societies functioning well. And if we destroy it, we are going to reap the whirlwind.
Yeah.
And,
well, the government has been.
You don't have to be a right winger, or you don't have to have a certain view on abortion or this or that to understand that the family's pretty doggone important.
Right. Well, the government has replaced the family. All we have to do now is have the family replace the government, and with that, we are totally out of time. So let me give you the last 30 seconds. Yeah. Paul, I'll give you the last 30 seconds to wrap things up.
Well, I like that idea a lot. Let me say to folks out there, I'd love for you to come to my website, thisiscommonsense.com. We have a discussion every day about a different issue, and I do a commentary, but we love the feedback from people. I would also encourage you to go to libertyifund.org. Liberty I Fund, we work with people all over the country to make changes at the local level, the state level, with people going to collect signatures from friends, neighbors, coworkers, put issues on the ballot, do it ourselves. And I'm convinced that's the only way we're going to get there. I am a friend called me now I'm going to forget the word he used, but basically I'm an optimist even when there's no reason to be an optimist. But I'll tell you what, if you don't try, you never succeed. So I'm urging people, don't give up, work together, stop expecting some politician to do it for us. That's got to be the craziest idea, and let's do it ourselves.
Right. Paul, thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. This is Paul Jacobs from American Icon. And Paul, we hope you will accept that invitation to return at a later date and give us an update of what's going on.
I'd love to.
Okay,
Thanks a lot,
great.
Joe.
Thank you so much. Folks, this is the end of today's broadcast. We'd like to thank our sponsors for the financial support, and we'd like to thank you for listening in. You can further the cause of liberty by recommending this program to your friends, and let us hear from you. Our email address is comments@libertytalkradio.com. Remember, you're either allowing your liberties to be taken away or you're striving to protect them. Unfortunately, there is no middle ground. Until next time, this is Joe Cristiano. You've been listening to Liberty Talk Radio. Stay well. Stay tuned.
Gotta be